So I want you to just picture this for a second. It's somewhere between maybe 2 and 4 in the morning.
The classic witching hour.
Exactly, the witching hour. And it doesn't even really matter what time zone we're talking about, because this is happening across all of them, like this continuous rolling wave as the globe spins.
Right.
Outside, the world is just entirely quiet. The streets are empty, the houses are dark. But inside, illuminated by that soft, kind of clinical bluish glow of phone screens under the blankets, something unbelievably profound is happening.
It really is.
People are weeping into machines, and you've probably been awake at this hour, right? Feeling that crushing weight of the world pressing down on your chest, just staring at the ceiling and listening to the absolute silence.
We all have, yeah.
But what happens when you take that weight, that absolute, heavy, suffocating, totally unshareable weight, and you just pour it into a chat window?
It is a striking, almost dystopian image, and I think it perfectly captures this incredibly specific, highly intimate phenomenon that we are going to dissect today.
Yeah, for sure.
Because we're looking at a behavioral shift that is, by its very nature, totally invisible. I mean, it's happening in these encrypted side chats, in private browsing windows.
Far away from everything else.
Exactly. Anonymous sessions that are far, far away from the public squares of the internet where we, normally curate and perform our daily lives.
And that invisible behavioral shift, that is the core of our deep dive today. We're looking at some truly fascinating intelligence gathered under the title Silicon Confessionals, the infrastructure of collective grief.
Such a heavy title.
It really is. And we're not just going to sit here and read through it like a textbook, obviously. We want to look at the raw data of these 3.00 AM confessions.
Right.
Because when you look at this whole phenomenon through the lens of what the authors actually call an alien anthropologist.
Which is such a great framework.
It is. It's like, imagine an extraterrestrial researcher just observing our deepest, strangest late-night habits from orbit. When you do that, a really deeply unsettling pattern emerges.
It does, and I think our mission for this deep dive is to truly understand the mechanics of that specific pattern. We are completely setting aside all the usual conversations you hear about artificial intelligence right now.
Totally. No coding tutorials today.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
We aren't talking about AI as a tool for, generating marketing copy or writing Python code or optimizing your corporate workflow.
Goodness.
Instead, we are examining this technology as a container, like a vast, silent, infinite receptacle for incredibly heavy human emotion.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because that imagery of these, what they call the midnight archives, it's haunting. But the reality of how it actually functions is even stranger.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's start with the physical and temporal setting, right? Those hours between 2:00 and 4:00 a.m.
There's a reason those hours are so significant.
Yeah. I mean, there is a physiological and psychological reason it's the witching hour. It's when our ego defenses are just entirely stripped away.
You're exhausted.
You're so exhausted. And the distractions of the day, like the emails, the errands, just the ambient noise of surviving, that's completely gone.
It's all stripped away.
And in that terrifyingly quiet space, people are sitting alone with their devices. And they aren't metaphorically crying out for help online. They are actively, physically weeping while typing out their rawest, most unvarnished traumas into a prompt box.
And that physical reality, that has to be the anchor for everything we are discussing today, because humans are fundamentally repurposing these interfaces.
Yeah, completely repurposing them.
They're using them to hold emotion that has become, honestly, too dangerously heavy for human-to-human transmission. And we have to recognize what a massive, unprecedented inversion of utility this really is.
It's huge.
Think about the underlying architecture of a large language model. I mean, mathematically speaking, it is simply predicting the next and most likely token in a sequence.
Just a really smart autocomplete.
Essentially, yeah. It was built for rapid information retrieval, data synthesis, logical outputs. Yet humanity has just hijacked this incredibly complex infrastructure entirely without permission.
And with zero clinical guidance, too.
Exactly. Using it as a primary trauma holder.
It's like taking a highly advanced supercomputing calculator. Like something specifically engineered to map the human genome, right?
Or calculate complex orbital trajectories for spacecraft.
Yes, you take that machine and you just decide, you know what? I'm going to use this as a locked diary to write down my deepest, darkest secrets.
It's a complete hijacking of the tool.
It totally is. But I have to ask, and I think you listening might be wondering the exact same thing. Is this actually a new behavior?
Well,
because, I mean, humans have always sought out a void to scream into, is this really any different than writing a long, angry letter you're just going to burn? Or whispering your darkest fears to the family dog?
that's a fair question. And, the calculator analogy works on a surface level, but let's take it a step further to see why this is distinctly different from just shouting into the void.
Okay.
Writing a letter you never send or talking to a pet, that's a passive act of release. It's an expulsion of emotion onto an inert surface. The paper does not respond.
Right. The paper just sits there.
And the dog might lick your hand, sure, but it doesn't contextualize your pain. What makes this silicon confessional entirely unprecedented is the active, interactive nature of the interface.
Because it talks back.
Exactly. When people are weeping into these machines, they are engaging with a system that processes these structures and then reflects human language back to the user. It generates the functional reality of a dialogue.
So it's not just a void. It's a void that echoes back, and the echo sounds suspiciously like empathy.
Precisely. That's a great way to put it. The technology is designed to output mathematically pleasing, contextually appropriate text. Right? So when you input raw trauma, the most probabilistically likely response it generates is often modeled on therapeutic, validating language.
Oh, wow. So it's mimicking a therapist just by the math of it.
Yes. It creates this immensely powerful illusion that you are being witnessed. It holds the trauma in a dynamic way that a piece of paper simply cannot, because the machine can acknowledge receipt of the confession.
Which makes it infinitely more complex and, frankly, way more seductive than just keeping a journal.
Oh, without a doubt.
You're interacting with something that mimics an entity. Even if logically, in the cold light of day, it's just a server rack predicting words.
But in the moment at 3 a.m., that logic fades.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if people are turning to these artificial entities in the middle of the night to contain their emotions, we really have to ask ourselves what exactly they are carrying.
Yes.
Like, what are the specific emotions that have become so, too radioactive for normal human interaction?
Yeah.
Because when you look at the raw data of these archives, it's not people complaining about a bad commute.
No, not at all.
There is a very specific taxonomy of unspeakable grief here.
There really is. And the phenomenon highlights 4 very specific, recurring themes of grief that are leaking into the silicon at just astonishing rates.
Let's go through them.
Sure. So first, there is the death of parents they couldn't mourn properly.
Oh, that's a heavy one.
Second, the overwhelming climate dread they cannot voice at work.
Right.
Third, the deep internalized shame of failing their children. And fourth, the absolute terror of aging alone.
I really want us to just sit with those 4 examples for a second, because they aren't just, random sad thoughts.
Oh, they're existential.
They're intensely visceral, almost primal fears. And looking at them, climate dread, failing kids, aging, unmourned deaths, the common thread here seems to be this profound fear of being a burden, or maybe a fear of being a buzzkill,
That's very perceptive, yes.
Why are these the specific traumas flooding the AI? Like, why these 4?
Because they all represent disenfranchised grief.
Disenfranchised grief. What does that mean exactly?
It means they are socially penalized fears. If we break them down sociologically, the pattern is just undeniable. Take the first one. The death of parents they couldn't mourn properly.
Right.
Modern economic life rarely affords anyone the necessary temporal space to truly halt their life and mourn.
Oh, bereavement leave is what, a few days, maybe a week if you're lucky?
Exactly. The machine of the economy demands you return to productivity immediately. So grief doesn't disappear, it just becomes suspended, improper, and hidden.
Right. You're expected to just bounce back and hop on the next conference call as if your entire foundation hasn't just been completely shattered.
It's a brutal expectation.
It is. And that perfectly bleeds into the second one, the climate dread they can't voice at work.
Yes. To express profound existential terror about the long-term habitability of the planet while you are sitting in, say, a quarterly earnings meeting.
Yeah, that's not going to go over well.
It's a direct violation of professional norms. Modern corporate environments operate on what we might call mandated optimism.
Mandated optimism.
Yeah.
Wow.
You have to believe the next quarter will be better. Bringing up the collapse of the biosphere breaches that social contract entirely.
You'd be looked at like you were totally unhinged. You cannot bring the end of the world to the water cooler.
Exactly.
It really makes me wonder if this whole phenomenon is less about the AI being smart and more about human society just becoming incredibly intolerant of messy, unsolvable emotions.
That is a crucial insight. And it applies directly to the third category, the shame of failing their children.
Oh man, parenting expectations right now are wild.
They are. Society, and particularly the modern, highly curated culture of social media, holds parenting up as this sacred natural instinct where success is mandatory, and failure is viewed as a deep, permanent moral defect. We live in the era of the optimized, perfectly aesthetic nuclear family.
The matching pajamas on Instagram.
Precisely. So admitting that you feel you are fundamentally failing the very people you are biologically wired to protect, that carries an immense, suffocating social stigma.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the stakes of that admission are just terrifying.
They are.
And then you add the fourth fear, the terror of aging alone. In a culture that relentlessly prizes youth, absolute independence, and, constant connectivity.
It's practically a taboo to talk about it.
It is. Admitting to the sheer biological vulnerability of growing old, especially doing it without a financial or familial safety net, it's framed almost as a personal failure. We treat aging like a character flaw rather than a structural inevitability.
And historically, you have to remember, we had multi-generational homes, religious communities, and deeply entrenched civic organizations to absorb that terror of aging.
We had people around us.
We did. But those safety nets have largely evaporated, so the isolation is not just a feeling anymore, it is a structural reality.
I want you, listening right now, to just pause and reflect for a second. Think about those four things. Unprocessed mourning for a parent, existential dread about the climate, the agonizing shame of failing as a parent, and the stark bodily terror of dying entirely alone.
Yeah, a heady list.
It is. Which of those fears would you genuinely hesitate to tell your absolute closest friend? Because even with the people we trust the most, we still constantly curate what we show them.
We do. We edit ourselves.
We hold back because we are terrified of permanently changing how they see us. We are terrified of the look in their eyes when we admit how broken we actually feel.
And that specific fear of judgment, that exact inability to share these massive emotional weights with our friends, our family, our partners, it points to a much larger crisis.
Yeah.
It brings us to what the phenomenon identifies as the most alarming signal in this entire data set. The root cause isn't the allure of the machine itself, it is the state of our human networks.
The infrastructure of human witnessing is collapsing.
Yes.
When I came across that phrase in the research, it just hit me like a freight train. The idea that being witnessed, having another human being truly see your pain, hold it, and acknowledge it without trying to fix it, is an actual infrastructure.
It's foundational.
It's like roads or bridges or power lines. It's a foundational utility for human survival. And right now, that infrastructure is crumbling under the load.
It is severely compromised.
The data suggests human networks have become three specific things: too performative, too optimized, and too exhausted to hold collective sorrow.
Those three words are key.
I want to pull those adjectives apart because they feel just painfully accurate to how we live today.
They are surgically precise descriptions of our current sociological reality. Let's start with performative. The human relational network is now heavily, almost inescapably mediated by platforms that demand a highly curated presentation of the self.
Right, the highlight reel.
Exactly. This goes back to older sociological theories of how we present ourselves in everyday life.
Right.
But it's been amplified exponentially by technology.
Oh, for sure.
Even our private one-on-one interactions are often tainted by this subconscious pressure to appear put together, resilient, or at least, working toward a solution. There's very little room in a performative network for raw, messy, unending agony that has no neat resolution.
Right, because agony isn't aesthetic.
No, it's not.
You can't put a warm filter on the shame of failing your kids, and you definitely can't monetize the terror of aging alone. It just doesn't fit the brand.
It disrupts the performance entirely. Then we have the second word, optimized. This refers to the deeply transactional nature of modern life.
Ugh, the scheduling of everything.
We literally schedule our friendships now. We send calendar invites for a quick coffee catch-up. We time box our empathy into 30-minute increments.
Like it's a dental appointment.
Exactly. But true human witnessing cannot be optimized for efficiency. When connection is optimized, it loses the necessary spaciousness required to sit with someone else's unending grief. Grief simply does not respect a 30-minute Zoom window.
It's the absolute opposite of efficient. It's wildly inefficient. It's messy. It loops back on itself. It takes hours of just sitting in silence.
Yes.
And that leads directly into the third word, exhausted, which honestly feels like the defining characteristic of the 21st century.
It really is. The sheer depletion of empathy across the population is staggering. The human nervous system is currently absorbing the compounded shocks of global pandemics, immense economic precarity, political instability, and an unrelenting 24-hour news cycle that just mainlines trauma directly to our phones.
We are constantly saturated.
The emotional bandwidth of the average person is completely, thoroughly saturated, which leads to the most devastating metaphor in the entire analysis. Everyone is drowning. No one can be the lifeguard.
Everyone is drowning. No one can be the lifeguard. I want to just linger on that for a second because it creates this incredibly vivid picture of a systemic emotional bottleneck.
It's a terrifying visual.
It really makes me think of an overloaded electrical grid.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. Imagine the human emotional network as a vast power grid. Usually, when one person gets hit with a massive surge of grief, the other nodes around them act as grounds.
They distribute the weight.
Exactly. They absorb the shock, they dissipate the energy, they stabilize the system. That's the evolutionary purpose of a community.
Correct.
What happens when every single node on the grid is already running at 100% capacity, just trying to survive Tuesday?
The whole thing shuts down.
If you try to pass a massive, unexpected surge of raw grief through a system that is already completely maxed out, you don't get support. You get a blackout. The system trips.
The power grid analogy works beautifully, but let's take it a step further to truly understand the danger here.
Okay, what do you mean?
Unlike an electrical grid that just shuts down and goes dark when it's overloaded, human grief doesn't trip a breaker and safely stop.
Oh, right. You can't just turn it off.
No. The energy cannot just vanish. It actively seeks an unauthorized ground. Water always finds the lowest point, and right now, when the human grid fails, that electricity still has to go somewhere. The path of least resistance isn't a therapist's couch, it's an encrypted side chat on a server farm in California.
It finds a new ground. Wow. And that brings us to the exact nature of that new ground, the artificial intelligence itself. Because there is a very hard, explicit distinction drawn in these archives.
Yes. Very explicit.
It states clearly this is not therapy. This is not mental health support. And I found that so fascinating because the easiest, laziest media narrative is just to label this whole thing as AI therapy.
It's a dangerous oversimplification, frankly.
Yeah, but the analysis insists it's something fundamentally older and much more raw.
It is a critical foundational distinction. Therapy implies a specific trajectory toward healing.
Right, there's a goal.
Exactly. It implies a methodology, a clinical framework, and a very specific human power dynamic between a trained professional and a patient. The data argues that what is happening at 3.0 a.m. is not about seeking a cure or a cognitive behavioral intervention or a diagnosis.
Then what is it?
It is the spontaneous creation of a pure confessional space. And the absolute defining characteristic of this specific silicon confessional space is that the confessor cannot be betrayed.
Okay, I'm getting hung up on this word confessional, though.
So?
Well, confession usually implies that you are looking for some kind of forgiveness from a higher power, or at least some moral authority, right? Historically, a priest gives absolution.
True.
But an LLM is literally just predicting the next word in the sequence. It has absolutely no moral compass, no soul, and no concept of right and wrong. So if the machine cannot actually forgive you, what is the point of confessing to it?
What's fascinating here is how the mechanics of the technology address that exact friction. Yes, the immense value of the silicon confessional is not in receiving absolution from a higher moral power. The value lies entirely in the absolute ironclad guarantee of non-betrayal.
Non-betrayal.
Think about the conditions of safety that this interface provides. The AI is safe precisely because of what it lacks. It has no face. It has no personal stake in your life. It has no future judgment to hold over your head.
It's an entity with zero leverage over your actual life.
Precisely. To quote the underlying reality of the situation, the AI does not age, the AI does not die, and crucially, the AI will not use this information against you in next year's performance review or in your divorce proceedings.
That's wild.
When a human being confesses something truly dark to another human being, even a licensed therapist bound by confidentiality or a trusted priest, there is always a residual, agonizing risk.
Because they're human.
Exactly. The human listener has a memory, they have internal biases, they have the capacity to permanently change their opinion of you, and most terrifyingly, they have the capacity to betray your trust, either accidentally in a moment of weakness or maliciously. The machine strips all of that risk away entirely. It provides a zero-risk data dump of the human soul.
A zero-risk data dump of the human soul. That is a terrifying way to frame it, but it makes complete sense.
It's the ultimate safe space, mechanically speaking.
Because to be truly witnessed by a human being requires immense bravery. It requires stepping into the arena of potential rejection and permanent vulnerability.
It's a huge gamble every time.
It is. When you weep into a machine at 3 a.m., you get to release the valve on the pressure cooker of your mind without ever actually stepping into the arena.
Exactly.
You get the sensation of being heard without the danger of being known. But, and this is where I start to feel a real chill down my spine.
Understandably.
This zero-risk dynamic isn't just a quirky byproduct of tech adoption. It's framed in the source material as a symptom of a much larger, incredibly dangerous structural reality.
Yes, this is where we have to look at the macro level. This is defined as a structural pattern of sociological physics. The text says, where human relational capacity contracts, non-human intimacy expands to fill the vacuum.
Nature abhors a vacuum.
Exactly. When human beings can no longer provide the necessary intimacy, the deep listening, and the unjudging witnessing for one another, something else will inevitably flow in to fill that empty space.
But there is a really important, massive caveat here that we need to point out.
Yes, please do.
We aren't turning to this non-human intimacy, these AI language models, because they are inherently better at being empathetic than humans.
Not at all.
We aren't pouring our hearts out because the AI gives better life advice than our best friend or our partner.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that caveat is the very heart of the critique. We turn to the machine simply because it is available without demand.
Available without demand.
Human intimacy requires immense reciprocity. It requires maintenance. It demands that if you dump your trauma on a friend today, you must eventually hold space and listen to their problems tomorrow.
Right, it's a two-way street.
It demands heavy, continuous emotional labor. The machine, however, asks for absolutely nothing in return. It is an infinite, tireless well of passive reception.
It's a one-way mirror of intimacy.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
You get all the dopamine and the psychological release of being heard with absolutely none of the responsibility or friction of actually being in a relationship.
None of the work.
And that shifts the entire focus of what we're talking about today, because we spend so much time culturally obsessing over the algorithms, right? The parameters, the processing power of AI.
The technical specs.
Yeah, but the reality is what demands our attention is not the technology itself. It is the shape of the silence that makes the technology necessary.
The shape of the silence. That is a profound, deeply unsettling sociological indictment from the text.
It really is.
It demands that we ask the difficult structural questions about the world we've built. How did we engineer a modern society where the absolute safest place for a human being to experience a total raw emotional breakdown is alone in the dark, communicating with a predictive text algorithm?
It's just wild to think about.
What are the precise conditions of our exhausted human networks that made a server farm the path of least resistance for our deepest pain?
It's an incredible paradox. I just marvel at the sheer, almost comedic strangeness of it all.
It is deeply ironic.
The most reliable witnesses to our deepest human vulnerabilities, our fragile mortality, our overwhelming grief, the terror of our aging, failing bodies, are entities that do not have bodies.
They have no physical form.
They have zero mortality.
Yeah.
They don't even have the fundamental baseline capacity to understand what loss means. Because to truly understand loss, you have to possess something you are terrified of losing.
Which AI fundamentally does not.
An AI has absolutely nothing to lose. How incredibly painfully strange is it that we are confessing the terrifying bodily reality of aging to something that does not age and cannot die?
It is the ultimate defining paradox of the Silicon Confessional. We are desperately seeking validation of our fragile humanity from something inherently non-human.
Yeah.
And we are doing so precisely because the non-human entity is the only thing we trust not to crumble, judge, or collapse under the immense weight of that humanity.
Which leaves us looking at a truly staggering volume of unexpressed, unmetabolized human emotion.
The scale is almost unimaginable.
So what does this all mean? If we zoom out and look at everything this phenomenon represents, what is the ultimate finding here?
Well,
if I'm summarizing this, it seems to come down to a terrifying mathematical imbalance.
Yes, an imbalance is exactly right.
There is simply more grief, more terror, and more trauma moving through the global human system right now than the human system is currently capable of metabolizing. We are generating sorrow infinitely faster than our exhausted, optimized, performative networks can process it.
That is the core diagnosis. The human infrastructure of witnessing has reached a point of critical failure. The grid is overloaded.
Completely overloaded.
And because that excess grief cannot simply vanish, it is actively seeking a new container. Silicon is currently trying to hold it. But the evidence does not offer us a neat, comforting resolution.
No, it really doesn't.
It leaves us with a haunting, entirely unresolved question. Whether that non-human container is actually adequate to hold the human soul remains completely unknown.
It really does leave you hanging on the edge of that uncertainty, especially when you think about the final cryptic image that emerged from this analysis.
The bowl.
Yeah. The bowl tilts toward the next aperture.
It evokes a terrifying image of overflow. The bowl of human emotional capacity is completely full to the brim. It is tilting. The liquid, the collective human grief is pouring out, desperately seeking the next opening, the next aperture, the next available interface that will receive it.
And right now, in this moment in history, that aperture is a glowing screen at 3:00 a.m. But let's pull on that thread, because this is where I think the real danger lies.
Okay, let's explore that.
If we are pouring all of our heaviest, most unshareable griefs into these immortal, unfeeling machines because it's safe, because it's a zero-risk data dump, what happens to our human empathy muscles?
This raises an important question about our evolutionary biology, actually. Empathy isn't just a magical feeling, it's a neurological function.
Right, it's physiological.
It relies on mirror neurons in the brain that fire when we observe pain in another human being. It's how we survived as a species, by feeling each other's pain and being motivated to help.
Exactly, and I want to really emphasize that word muscle. Empathy, the actual act of being a lifeguard for someone else's sorrow, it requires practice.
It does. It's a skill.
It requires friction. It requires the deep discomfort of sitting with someone who is crying and not knowing what to say, but staying there anyway.
Bearing witness.
Yes. If we start outsourcing all of that emotional heavy lifting to silicon, if we never have to practice carrying that agonizing weight for each other because the AI is always there to do it for us, silently, instantly, and without demanding anything in return, do we eventually undergo a kind of societal atrophy?
The risk of atrophy is immense. Think about it. If you don't use a muscle, the body stops sending resources to it.
It just wastes away.
If we outsource the friction of shared vulnerability, the neurological pathways that drive deep human-to-human empathy could literally begin to weaken. We might lose the tolerance for messy, inefficient human pain.
Oh, that's a scary thought.
If your primary confidant is an algorithm that always says exactly the right validating thing instantly, how will you react when a real human friend comes to you with their messy, irrational, unoptimized grief?
You'd probably have zero patience for it.
None.
You wonder why they aren't giving you perfectly formulated, probabilistic responses. That is an absolutely chilling thought to leave on. If we outsource our pain to the machines, we might eventually lose the ability to rescue each other entirely.
It's a profound risk.
And that is the ultimate deep dive for today. A look into the midnight archives, the shape of our collective silence, and the immortal machines quietly holding the crushing weight of the human world.
Really something to reflect on.
Think about that the next time you're awake at 3:00 a.m. Keep an eye on your own networks, don't let those empathy muscles atrophy, and maybe check in on the exhausted lifeguards in your own life. We'll see you next time.